The battlefield stretched endlessly across the scarred surface of Eridanus Prime, a desolate moon orbiting a dying star. Human forces had been locked in combat with the Zarnathian Empire for what felt like an eternity, though it had only been 3 days. Private Daniel Cross crouched behind a jagged outcrop of obsidian-like rock, his pulse rifle humming softly as it recharged. The crimson sky above crackled with energy discharges from both sides' weapons, painting the landscape in flashes of searing light. Daniel's unit had been tasked with holding this particular ridge against the advancing Zarnathian forces. The aliens were formidable opponents. Tall, lithe warriors whose iridescent scales shimmered even in the dim light of the distant sun. Their society was matriarchal, led by warrior queens who commanded their troops with ruthless efficiency. The humans had learned this the hard way during the initial skirmishes when they mistakenly targeted what they thought were standard soldiers, only to discover they were engaging elite commanders. As Daniel watched through his visor's tactical display, he could see the human defensive line stretching thin. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm channel, ordering strategic retreats while maintaining perimeter integrity. The orders sounded military enough, but everyone knew they were losing ground. The Zarnathians employed tactics that seemed almost choreographed, flowing around human defenses like water finding its way through cracks. What made this conflict particularly challenging was the Zarnathians' ability to adapt. They didn't just fight, they studied their opponents, learning and evolving their strategies mid-battle. Several times already, Daniel had witnessed their commanders altering formations or switching weapons based on observed human weaknesses. It was as if every defeat taught them something new, making each subsequent engagement more difficult than the last. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal, a testament to the constant exchange of energy weapons between the two forces. Daniel checked his ammunition count again, though he knew it wouldn't matter much longer. Their supply lines were stretched thin, and reinforcements were still hours away, if they arrived at all. The weight of his powered armor suddenly felt heavier, not from physical exhaustion but from the crushing realization that this might be where it all ended. Yet amidst the chaos, there was something about these alien warriors that intrigued him beyond their tactical prowess. Their movements possessed a grace that seemed almost artistic, their attacks flowing into defenses with seamless precision. Even now, as he watched a group of Zarnathian warriors execute a flanking maneuver, he couldn't help but admire the elegance of their coordination, despite the deadly intent behind it. "Cross, focus!" snapped Sergeant Patel's voice in his earpiece, jolting him back to reality. "You're staring at them again." Daniel shook his head, forcing himself to concentrate. There would be time later to ponder the nature of their enemy, if there was a later. For now, survival demanded his full attention. Even as part of his mind rebelled against treating these magnificent creatures solely as adversaries to be destroyed. Through the haze of battle smoke, Daniel's eyes caught movement that stood apart from the rest, a figure executing maneuvers so fluid they seemed impossible for any living being. Commander Solara, leader of the Zarnathian strike force, moved through the battlefield like a dancer performing an intricate routine. Her crystalline weapon hummed with power, its tip weaving patterns in the air that left trails of violet light. Each step she took radiated purpose, blending aggression with an almost ritualistic elegance that made her seem more spirit than soldier. Her scales shimmered in shades of deep emerald and gold, catching the dim light in ways that made her appear to glow from within. Unlike her subordinates, who wore practical combat harnesses adorned with functional equipment, Solara's armor seemed designed to accentuate rather than protect. Thin bands of reinforced alloy wrapped around her limbs and torso, leaving much of her scaled flesh exposed. The effect was simultaneously intimidating and mesmerizing, a perfect blend of beauty and lethality that defied human understanding of warfare. What struck Daniel most was how she fought, not merely to kill, but to demonstrate superiority. Every movement served multiple purposes, disabling enemies while showcasing her skill, creating openings for her warriors while maintaining perfect control of her personal space. When she engaged a group of human marines, it wasn't a brawl but a carefully orchestrated performance. She would feint left, drawing fire that exposed vulnerabilities in their formation, then strike with precise efficiency that left her opponents incapacitated rather than dead. The message was clear: surrender was preferable to death, and resistance was futile against such mastery. Her presence on the battlefield created ripples that affected both sides. Human soldiers found themselves hesitating before firing, caught between professional duty and reluctant admiration for her artistry in combat. Among her own troops, Solara inspired absolute devotion. Her warriors followed her lead without question, their movements synchronizing with hers in ways that suggested telepathic connection rather than mere training. When she leapt into the air to avoid a grenade blast, landing perfectly balanced on a rocky outcrop, her entire squad adjusted their positions instantaneously, forming a protective perimeter that flowed around her like liquid metal. Even the way she communicated commands differed from standard military protocol. Instead of harsh barks or digital signals, Solara used melodic tones that carried across the battlefield. To human ears, they sounded like music rather than orders, yet her troops responded with immediate precision. Daniel realized with growing fascination that these weren't just tactical directives but something deeper, a shared language of movement and sound that bonded her warriors together. As the battle raged on, Solara's fighting style revealed itself to be more than mere technique. It was a philosophy, a way of being that transcended simple victory or defeat. She never wasted energy, never struck without purpose, and always maintained perfect balance between offense and defense. Watching her engage multiple opponents simultaneously was like witnessing a master swordsman practicing forms, each movement building upon the last to create a tapestry of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying. What troubled Daniel most was how this display of martial artistry resonated with something deep within him. As a child, he'd trained in various martial arts, drawn to the discipline and elegance of controlled movement. Now, facing possibly the greatest opponent he'd ever encountered, he found himself analyzing her techniques not to counter them, but to understand them. The way she shifted her weight before striking, the subtle rotations of her upper body that generated power without sacrificing mobility, it all spoke to a level of mastery he'd never imagined possible. The revelation hit him hard. They were fighting not just another species, but beings who had elevated combat to an art form that humanity hadn't yet achieved. The realization filled him with conflicting emotions, awe at their sophistication, shame at his own comparative clumsiness, and a growing sense that perhaps there was more to these aliens than met the eye. In Solara's graceful destruction, he saw not just an enemy commander, but a culture that viewed warfare as something sacred, something to be perfected rather than merely endured. The moment came when Daniel found himself alone with Solara in a narrow ravine, cut off from both forces by a sudden landslide triggered by orbital bombardment. His pulse rifle lay damaged from the falling debris, its power core flickering erratically. Across from him, Solara stood equally trapped, her crystalline weapon deactivated by the same electromagnetic pulse that had disabled his communications. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the distant rumble of continued fighting and the soft scrape of their boots shifting on loose gravel. "You are persistent," Solara finally said, her voice flowing through the translator implant with unexpected musicality. "I've marked your movements across 4 engagements. You fight differently from your kind." She tilted her head, her multifaceted eyes catching the dim light in fascinating patterns. "Less rigid, more fluid." Daniel chuckled despite himself. "And you're supposed to be trying to kill me right now. Isn't that what enemies do?" He gestured toward her weapon, currently hanging useless at her side. "Though I guess we're both having technical difficulties." Solara's response surprised him. Instead of the expected threat or challenge, she stepped closer, her movements retaining that graceful quality even in casual interaction. "Among my people, when 2 warriors meet in isolation, it is customary to speak first, to understand why we fight before continuing hostilities." She paused, studying him intently. "Your species fascinates me. Your warriors carry such emotion into battle. Fear, anger, determination. Yet you persist despite overwhelming odds. Why?" The question caught Daniel off guard. Military training had prepared him for many scenarios, but philosophical discussions with enemy commanders hadn't been among them. "Maybe because we have something worth fighting for," he ventured. "Home, family, freedom. Things you probably don't understand." To his surprise, Solara's expression softened, an impressive feat given her reptilian features. "On the contrary, Lieutenant Cross, I understand these concepts perhaps better than you realize. My own world." She stopped abruptly, her scales flashing briefly in what Daniel interpreted as embarrassment. Clearing her throat, or what passed for one, she changed tack. "Tell me, human, what do you seek in your life beyond this battlefield?" The question seemed absurd under the circumstances, but something about her earnest curiosity compelled him to answer. Well, assuming I survive this mess, I'd like to open a dojo back on Earth. Teach kids martial arts. Maybe settle down, find someone who understands that sometimes strength isn't about winning fights. He laughed self-consciously. Not exactly hero material, I know. Solara's next words froze him in place. Your customs of pair bonding, marriage, you call it? Tell me more about this. Her tone held none of the clinical detachment he'd expect from an enemy interrogator. Instead, there was genuine interest, even longing. Before Daniel could respond, the ground trembled again, and both warriors instinctively dropped into defensive stances. When the shaking subsided, Solara straightened and fixed him with an intense gaze. Among my people, when a warrior admires another's skill and spirit, regardless of allegiance. She hesitated, her normally confident demeanor faltering. It is not uncommon to offer a proposition. A proposition? Daniel asked warily, hand moving toward his sidearm. If this is some kind of trap. It is no trap, Solara interrupted sharply. Though perhaps it is madness. Lieutenant Daniel Cross of Earth, despite our current enmity, I find myself compelled to ask. She drew herself up to her full height, her voice ringing with formal authority. Would you consider joining with me in the Zarnathian tradition of bond mating? The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither fully understood. Daniel stared at her, mouth working soundlessly as his brain struggled to process what had just happened. Here he was, trapped in a ravine with an alien warrior who had spent the last 3 days trying to kill him, and now she wanted to marry him? This has to be some kind of psychological warfare tactic, he managed finally, though even to his own ears the protest sounded weak. Because despite everything, the danger, the absurdity, the sheer impossibility of the situation, he couldn't deny the spark of attraction he'd felt watching her fight. Or the way her straightforward honesty cut through the usual diplomatic double-talk he'd come to expect from enemy commanders. Solara's response was immediate and fierce. Do not insult me with such suggestions. A Zarnathian warrior does not use deception in matters of honor. If I wished you dead, you would be dead. This offer comes from respect, not manipulation. But we're literally at war, Daniel pointed out, waving his arms in exasperation. Your people have been attacking mine non-stop for days. We're enemies. Temporary conditions need not dictate permanent decisions, Solara countered smoothly. Throughout history, unions between former adversaries have often paved the way to peace. Consider it a strategic alliance with personal benefits. She added the last part with a sly tilt of her head that Daniel found unexpectedly charming. His tactical mind kicked in, analyzing the situation from every angle. The pragmatic part of him recognized the potential advantages. A high-ranking Zarnathian commander defecting to humanity's side could turn the tide of the war. But the human part of him rebelled at the idea of reducing such a profound decision to mere military strategy. Not when he was looking into eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of possibility. And what exactly does bond mating entail in Zarnathian culture? He asked cautiously, trying to buy time to think. Because back home, marriage usually involves things like dating, getting to know each other. Solara's scales rippled with amusement. Ah, but that is precisely what we are doing now, is it not? Exchanging knowledge, testing compatibility. Though I admit, your human customs seem inefficient. On Zarnathia, when two warriors recognize mutual admiration, they act swiftly before external factors can interfere. External factors like, say, our respective armies trying to kill each other? Daniel quipped, earning him another ripple of scales that he was starting to interpret as laughter. Indeed, Solara acknowledged. But consider this. Would you rather maintain the status quo of endless conflict, or explore a path that might lead to mutual understanding? I have observed your species' capacity for adaptation and growth. Perhaps together, we could forge a new future for both our peoples. The sincerity in her voice struck Daniel harder than any weapon she'd wielded against him. Here was a warrior willing to risk everything, her position, her honor, possibly her life, for the chance to bridge the gap between their species. And despite everything his training told him about maintaining emotional distance from the enemy, he found himself considering her proposal, not just as a soldier, but as a man who'd always believed in the possibility of peace through understanding. "You do realize," he said slowly, "that if anyone finds out about this conversation, we'll both be court-martialed, or whatever the Zarnathian equivalent is?" Solara's response was immediate and confident. "Then we must ensure that our intentions remain known only to us. For now. After all, even the grandest alliances must begin somewhere. Why not here, between two warriors who recognize each other's worth despite the circumstances?" The tension between them shifted subtly, morphing from potential combatants to something far more complex. Daniel found himself studying Solara with new eyes, noting details he'd previously overlooked in the heat of battle. The way her scales shifted colors in response to her emotions reminded him of mood rings he'd seen as a child, though infinitely more sophisticated. Tiny scars crisscrossed her forearms, honorable wounds earned in countless engagements, each telling a story she hadn't yet shared. Most intriguing were her hands, which despite their obvious strength handled her weapon with a delicacy that spoke of years of dedicated practice. "I'm curious," he ventured, trying to keep his voice casual despite the gravity of their situation. "How does a warrior of your caliber end up commanding a strike force against humanity? You don't seem like someone who follows orders blindly." Solara's expression softened, though her posture remained alert. "My journey has been unconventional. I was born during the final days of our last great conflict, when our previous emperor fell. My mother, a scholar rather than a warrior, raised me to value knowledge as much as combat skills. When I proved proficient in both, I became something rare among our people, a warrior diplomat." She paused, her scales rippling in what Daniel now recognized as contemplation. "Our Empress chose me personally for this mission, believing my unique perspective might prevent unnecessary bloodshed. So far, I fear I have disappointed her." The admission startled Daniel. "Disappointed? From what I've seen, you've been devastatingly effective." "Effectiveness is not the same as success," Solara countered. "Every life lost represents a failure to find common ground. Every destroyed vessel is a missed opportunity for dialogue." She gestured toward the distant sounds of battle. "Your species fights with such passion, such conviction. It reminds me of stories from our ancient past, when we too waged wars driven by emotion rather than reason. Perhaps that is why I find myself drawn to you. Your humanity echoes our forgotten heritage." Daniel absorbed this revelation, seeing their conflict in a new light. "Back home, they tell us you're emotionless killing machines. That you invade worlds without mercy or compassion." Solara's laugh was rich and musical. "And you believed them? Humans are remarkably similar to us in many ways. Both our species value courage, honor, and sacrifice. The difference lies in how we express these qualities. Your people wear their hearts openly, while we conceal them beneath layers of tradition and protocol." She touched her chest lightly. "But believe me, Lieutenant Cross, we feel deeply. Perhaps too deeply for our own good." Their conversation was interrupted by a low rumble that shook the ravine walls. Instinctively, both warriors dropped into defensive positions, weapons forgotten as they scanned their surroundings. The landslide had created a natural amphitheater, amplifying every sound from above. Through the dust settling from the tremor, Daniel noticed something remarkable. A series of carvings etched into the ravine walls, illuminated by veins of phosphorescent minerals. "These markings," Solara breathed, approaching the nearest wall with reverence. "They are ancient Zarnathian script. This place, it is sacred ground." Her fingers traced the glowing symbols gently, her scales glowing in harmony with the mineral lights. "These tell of a time when our ancestors sought peace with another species, a pact sealed through union, much like what I propose to you." Daniel joined her, marveling at the intricate designs. "You mean this has happened before? Interspecies bonding?" "Long ago," Solara confirmed. "Before we became isolated, before we built our empire. These records speak of alliances formed through mutual respect and admiration, much like what I feel for you now." She turned to face him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the ancient lights. "Perhaps fate has brought us here for a reason. To rediscover what we once knew, that strength exists not in conquest, but in understanding." As they explored the carvings together, Daniel found himself sharing stories of Earth's own history, of wars ended through unexpected alliances, of cultures transformed by contact with others. Solara listened intently, occasionally adding insights from Zarnathian lore that paralleled human experiences. The more they talked, the more apparent it became that their species shared fundamental values masked by superficial differences. "I've fought beside hundreds of soldiers," Daniel admitted, running his hand along a particularly intricate carving depicting two figures merging into one. "But I've never met anyone who makes me question everything I thought I knew about warfare. About enemies. About trust." Solara placed her hand over his, the warmth of her touch surprising despite her reptilian appearance. "And I have faced countless opponents, but never one who sees beyond my scales to the soul beneath. Who recognizes that true strength lies not in domination, but in the courage to reach across divides." She withdrew slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on his. "This is why I offered what I did. Not because it is strategic, but because it feels inevitable." Their moment of connection was shattered by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps above. Both warriors reacted instantly, retreating to opposite sides of the ravine while activating what remained of their communication devices. Through the static, Daniel could hear Captain Rodriguez's voice calling for status updates, while Solara received urgent hails from her second-in-command. "We cannot remain here much longer," she whispered urgently, though her eyes betrayed reluctance to end their unprecedented encounter. "When we meet again, it will be as enemies until we can secure privacy to discuss this further." Daniel nodded grimly, already feeling the weight of their impending separation. "Just promise me one thing. Next time we face each other, try not to aim for center mass, okay?" Solara's scales flashed with amusement. "I make no promises, Lieutenant Cross. But perhaps I shall aim slightly to the left instead." Her expression grew serious. "Until we meet again, may your courage remain steadfast. And may your aim continue to impress," Daniel returned, already missing their tenuous connection as they prepared to return to their respective sides. The carvings glowed softly behind them, silent witnesses to an encounter that had transformed both warriors in ways neither fully understood yet. The return to their respective command structures proved more challenging than either had anticipated. Daniel found himself subjected to increasingly suspicious glances from his fellow soldiers, especially after he argued against several aggressive maneuvers that would have targeted Solara's position. During strategy briefings, he caught himself automatically considering how each plan might affect her safety, a reflex that alarmed him almost as much as it confused his superiors. Captain Rodriguez called him into a private meeting, her expression unreadable. "Cross, you've been recommending some unconventional approaches lately. Mind explaining why you suddenly seem more interested in preserving Zarnathian lives than eliminating them?" The question hit too close to home. "Sir, it's just tactical consideration. Their commander, Solara, she's shown patterns of behavior that suggest she might be open to negotiation. If we push too hard—" "Negotiation," Rodriguez interrupted sharply. "With the same alien who's been leading attacks against our positions for days? The one responsible for the loss of Baker's unit." Her voice softened, taking on a concerned tone. "Daniel, I've known you since basic training. Something's changed. Are you compromised?" The accusation stung worse than any wound he'd received in battle. "No, sir. Just thinking outside the box. Trying to minimize casualties where possible." The lie tasted bitter, but revealing the truth would only make matters worse. He forced himself to meet Rodriguez's eyes. "Permission to return to duty, sir?" Rodriguez studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Granted. But Cross, stay sharp. We can't afford distractions, not now." Meanwhile, Solara faced her own challenges. Her second-in-command, Commander Vortak, had become increasingly vocal about her recent decisions. "You've allowed 3 prime opportunities to destroy key human positions to pass," Vortak stated during their latest tactical review. "Our warriors grow restless. They question your commitment to victory." Solara maintained her composure, though her scales flickered with irritation. "Victory achieved through slaughter is hollow, Vortak. Have you forgotten our mission objectives? We are here to establish dominance through demonstration of superior capability, not extermination. Superior capability demonstrated through decisive action, Vortak countered. Your hesitation suggests weakness. Some whisper of human influence. The room temperature seemed to drop as Solara fixed Vortak with a penetrating stare. Careful, Commander. Questioning my loyalty borders on treason. My methods have consistently proven effective throughout this campaign. She activated the holographic display. Observe our progress. Every human assault has been repelled, every attempt to break our lines thwarted. Yet our casualties remain minimal compared to theirs. Would you prefer the alternative? Vortak bowed slightly, though his expression remained skeptical. Forgive me, Commander, but our warriors require clear direction. They grow confused by your unorthodox approach. Solara's response was measured. Inform our troops that we prepare for a decisive engagement. Within 48 cycles, we will achieve our objectives through force of arms. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. After which, perhaps new possibilities may present themselves. Dismissed. Both leaders found themselves walking a razor's edge between their official duties and their growing connection. Daniel began developing elaborate excuses to explain his recommendations, careful to frame them in purely tactical terms. He started keeping detailed notes of Solara's movements and strategies, not for targeting purposes but to better understand her thought processes. Each entry felt like a betrayal of his comrades, yet withholding this information seemed equally wrong. Solara, for her part, implemented subtle changes in her command style. She began positioning her forces in ways that maximized defensive capabilities while minimizing lethal confrontations. During skirmishes, she ensured her warriors focused on disabling rather than destroying human equipment. Her reports to the Empress emphasized strategic positioning and resource conservation, careful to highlight successes while downplaying any hint of leniency. The strain of maintaining these dual identities manifested physically. Daniel noticed increasing tension headaches and difficulty sleeping, while Solara found her scales losing their usual luster, a sure sign of stress among her people. Yet neither could bring themselves to sever the fragile connection they'd forged in the ravine. Their covert communications, transmitted through encrypted channels hidden within standard military frequencies, became lifelines in the midst of chaos. Your recommendation to delay the northern assault was noted, Solara would transmit. Our warriors appreciated the respite. Daniel's responses were equally coded, observing interesting patterns in your defensive formations. Almost artistic in execution. These exchanges provided moments of clarity in an increasingly murky situation. They began developing a shared language of military terminology infused with personal meaning, each message carrying layers of implied understanding. When Daniel reported unusual mineral deposits detected in Sector 7, Solara knew he referenced their discovery in the ravine. Her reply about optimal conditions for diplomatic negotiations in that region acknowledged his reference while maintaining plausible deniability. The pressure mounted as both sides prepared for what appeared to be the final phase of the conflict. Reinforcements arrived for both factions, bringing fresh troops and renewed determination. Daniel watched with growing dread as his superiors planned a massive coordinated assault aimed directly at Solara's command center. Meanwhile, Solara received orders from the Empress herself to prepare for a decisive engagement that would end human resistance on Eridanus Prime. In separate briefing rooms, both warriors studied the same tactical maps, knowing that the coming confrontation would force them to choose between their duty and their growing bond. Daniel's fingers traced the projected assault routes, mentally calculating angles and timing that might give Solara an advantage without appearing to sabotage the operation. Solara, reviewing her defensive preparations, found herself intentionally creating vulnerabilities that Daniel's forces could exploit, with minimal risk to her warriors. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their professional competence had never been higher, their tactical acumen sharper than ever. Yet these very skills now worked against their respective causes, as each sought to protect the other while maintaining appearances of loyalty. The weight of their deception grew heavier with each passing hour, threatening to crush them beneath its burden. As the appointed time for the final engagement approached, both found themselves grappling with fundamental questions about identity and purpose. Was Daniel still truly human if he couldn't wholeheartedly commit to humanity's cause? Could Solara call herself a Zarnathian warrior while deliberately undermining her empire's objectives? The answers eluded them, buried beneath layers of conflicting loyalties and emerging affection. Their covert messages grew more frequent, more desperate. The weather patterns suggest storm activity during the operation, Daniel transmitted, knowing Solara would understand this as a warning about environmental hazards. Recommend adjusting deployment schedules accordingly. Solara's reply came quickly. Atmospheric conditions indeed problematic. Perhaps a temporary ceasefire for maintenance purposes. Each suggestion carried the weight of lives saved or lost, of futures preserved or destroyed. Neither knew how much longer they could maintain this precarious balance. The coming battle would demand everything from them: courage, skill, and ultimately, choices that would define not just their relationship, but the fate of their species' conflict. As they prepared for what might be their final confrontation, both warriors clung to the hope that somehow, amid the chaos of war, they might find a path that honored both their duty and their hearts. The eve of the final engagement descended upon Eridanus Prime like a shroud, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Daniel found himself pacing the confines of his quarters, unable to shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched his every move. His security clearance had been mysteriously downgraded earlier that day, limiting his access to crucial tactical data. More disturbingly, he'd caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces among the intelligence officers, men and women whose uniforms bore subtle modifications suggesting they belonged to internal security rather than regular military channels. Across the contested territory, Solara faced her own surveillance. Vortak had assigned 2 additional aides to her command staff, both exhibiting the cold efficiency characteristic of Imperial intelligence agents. Their presence stifled her ability to communicate freely, forcing her to rely on increasingly convoluted encryption protocols when contacting Daniel. Worse still, her direct communication link to the Empress had been restricted, requiring all reports to pass through newly appointed intermediaries who scrutinized every word for signs of dissent. The situation escalated when both warriors independently discovered evidence of parallel investigations into their activities. Daniel stumbled upon classified memos detailing analysis of his recent tactical recommendations, each marked with ominous annotations questioning his judgment and loyalty. Meanwhile, Solara intercepted encrypted dispatches ordering discreet monitoring of her command decisions, accompanied by speculative assessments of potential human influence on her strategies. Their next covert communication session revealed the extent of the suspicion surrounding them. "Our dance grows more complicated," Solara transmitted through a cascade of mathematical algorithms disguised as routine sensor data. 6 sets of eyes now watch my every move. My quarters have been rearranged during my absence. "Join the club," Daniel replied, encoding his response within a routine equipment status report. "My quarters got redecorated too. New furniture includes 2 listening devices and a thermal scanner powerful enough to detect heartbeat variations. Someone's taking an unhealthy interest in my sleeping patterns." The gravity of their situation crystallized during a tense exchange that nearly cost them both dearly. While coordinating a seemingly innocuous adjustment to patrol routes, their transmission was suddenly interrupted by a priority override signal. For 30 agonizing seconds, they listened to their respective security officers demanding explanations for the unusual data traffic. Only quick thinking, Daniel claiming interference from solar radiation, Solara citing calibration issues with her communication array, prevented immediate exposure. The incident left both warriors shaken. Their carefully constructed facade of normalcy had developed cracks, and through those cracks seeped the cold reality of their predicament. Trust, that most fragile of commodities during wartime, had begun eroding on all sides. Fellow officers who had once greeted Daniel with friendly nods now avoided his gaze. Solara's warriors, once united in their devotion, now exchanged meaningful glances when she issued orders that seemed to favor preservation over annihilation. Complicating matters further was the emergence of conflicting agendas within their respective chains of command. Daniel discovered that certain factions within human leadership viewed the upcoming battle as an opportunity to test experimental weapons, regardless of potential collateral damage. Similarly, Solara learned of plans to deploy newly developed biological agents designed to incapacitate human forces, but which carried significant risks to Zarnathian warriors as well. These revelations forced them to walk an increasingly narrow path between duty and conscience. Daniel found himself rewriting operation plans in real time, inserting subtle modifications that would protect Solara's positions while maintaining the appearance of compliance with his superiors' directives. Solara adopted similar tactics, implementing defensive measures that appeared aggressive but contained built-in fail-safes to prevent catastrophic outcomes. Their covert communications became a delicate balancing act, each message carrying multiple layers of meaning. What began as simple tactical exchanges evolved into complex narratives of misdirection and plausible deniability. A request for additional atmospheric readings might actually warn of incoming drone strikes, while a report on mineral composition analysis could mask critical information about troop movements. The psychological toll mounted steadily. Daniel began experiencing vivid nightmares where he stood trial before a military tribunal, his every action dissected and condemned. During waking hours, he caught himself questioning the motives behind every order he received, wondering whether he was being set up for failure, or worse, being tested for loyalty. Solara, typically composed and confident, started displaying signs of stress that even her warriors couldn't ignore. Her scales lost their iridescence, and her usually fluid movements became fractionally less graceful, betraying inner turmoil. Their attempts to maintain normal interactions with their respective comrades grew increasingly strained. Daniel's jokes fell flat during briefings, his forced laughter sounding hollow even to his own ears. Solara's legendary decisiveness gave way to moments of hesitation that puzzled her subordinates and fueled suspicions among her detractors. Both warriors found themselves withdrawing from social interactions, using the excuse of intense preparation for the coming battle to justify their isolation. The situation reached a crisis point when both received simultaneous summonses to high-level strategy meetings, Daniel to Central Command, Solara to the Imperial War Council. Separated by miles of hostile territory and layers of security protocols, they prepared for what might be their final performances as trusted commanders. Each knew that a single misstep during these sessions could unravel months of careful deception, exposing their secret connection and condemning them as traitors to their respective causes. As they prepared their presentations, rehearsing explanations for questionable decisions and crafting plausible narratives for suspicious patterns in their command records, both warriors felt the weight of their deception pressing down on them. The lines between loyalty and betrayal, duty and desire, had blurred to the point where neither could say with certainty where one ended and the other began. Their shared goal of forging peace through understanding now seemed impossibly distant, obscured by layers of suspicion and the relentless march toward total war. Yet even as they readied themselves for what might be their final acts of subterfuge, a spark of defiance burned within them. The system that sought to control them, to define their roles as enemy combatants, had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their connection. What had begun as professional admiration had evolved into something far more complex, a bond forged not in spite of their differences, but because of them. As they prepared to face their respective inquisitors, both Daniel and Solara resolved to fight not just for survival, but for the right to determine their own destinies in a universe that seemed determined to keep them apart. The day of the decisive battle dawned with an eerie stillness that seemed to mock the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Daniel stood at the forefront of his unit, his pulse rifle humming softly in his hands, while Solara commanded her warriors from a vantage point just visible through the haze of the battlefield. The air crackled with anticipation, each side poised for the clash that would determine the fate of Eridanus Prime, and perhaps their own destinies. As the first wave of human forces advanced, Daniel's heart pounded not just with the familiar adrenaline of combat but with the weight of everything he had risked to protect Solara. He signaled his squad to hold back slightly, buying precious seconds to ensure their movements aligned with the vulnerabilities Solara had deliberately left in her defenses. It was a dangerous game, one that could unravel at any moment if either side grew suspicious. On the alien side, Solara executed her strategy with precision, her warriors flowing around the human advance like water shaping itself to obstacles. She allowed her forces to retreat strategically, drawing the humans deeper into positions where they could be contained without excessive casualties. Her scales shimmered faintly with tension, betraying the immense pressure she felt to balance her duty as a commander with her growing affection for Daniel. The turning point came when a surprise artillery strike from the human side threatened to collapse Solara's carefully orchestrated defensive line. In that critical moment, Daniel made a split-second decision that would change everything. Ignoring direct orders from Central Command, he redirected his unit's firepower to neutralize the artillery barrage, effectively shielding Solara's position. His actions were immediately flagged by internal security, and within moments, he found himself surrounded by armed MPs demanding his surrender. Simultaneously, Solara faced her own reckoning. Vortak and 2 Imperial intelligence agents confronted her on the battlefield, accusing her of deliberate sabotage and treason against the Zarnathian Empire. Her warriors hesitated, torn between loyalty to their commander and the damning evidence presented against her. For the first time, Solara's authority wavered, her scales dimming under the weight of betrayal. But then something extraordinary happened. As Daniel was being dragged away by his own people, shouting protests about miscommunication and tactical necessity, Solara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the cacophony of battle like a blade. "Cease this madness," she commanded, her tone carrying the unmistakable authority of a warrior queen. "I will not allow my warriors, or yours, to spill more blood over misunderstandings." Her declaration stunned both sides into silence. Without hesitation, she strode toward the human lines, her crystalline weapon deactivated and held low as a gesture of peace. Behind her, her warriors exchanged uncertain glances but ultimately followed her lead, lowering their weapons in unison. The sight was surreal, an entire Zarnathian force standing down in the middle of a war zone. Daniel seized the opportunity, breaking free from his captors with a desperate surge of strength. "Listen to her," he shouted, his voice hoarse but filled with conviction. "This isn't about winning or losing anymore, it's about survival. About finding a way forward that doesn't cost us everything." For a tense moment, it seemed as though the fragile truce might shatter. Human commanders barked orders to re-engage, while Vortak growled threats of execution if Solara persisted in her defiance. But then, something remarkable occurred. One by one, soldiers on both sides began lowering their weapons, not out of obedience, but out of sheer exhaustion with the endless cycle of violence. They had fought long enough to recognize the futility of continuing, especially when faced with leaders willing to risk everything for peace. Solara reached Daniel's side, her presence commanding even amidst the chaos. Together, they addressed the assembled forces, their voices blending in a harmony that transcended language barriers. "We are warriors," Solara declared, "but we are also sentient beings capable of choice. Today, we choose life over death, understanding over hatred." Daniel added, his words carrying the raw emotion of someone who had stared into the abyss and refused to give up. "You don't have to trust us yet. But you do have to trust yourselves enough to stop fighting. For now. Let's talk. Let's find a way to coexist without destroying each other." Their plea resonated deeply, striking a chord among soldiers weary of bloodshed. Slowly, the battlefield transformed from a zone of conflict into a space of cautious negotiation. Representatives from both sides emerged tentatively, forming impromptu councils to discuss terms of ceasefire. Meanwhile, Daniel and Solara remained at the center of it all, their bond serving as living proof that enemies could become allies, and perhaps something more. In the weeks that followed, the makeshift truce evolved into formal peace talks brokered by both human and Zarnathian leaders. Though resistance remained from hardliners on both sides, the undeniable success of Daniel and Solara's intervention gave momentum to those advocating for diplomacy over destruction. The ancient carvings in the ravine became a symbol of hope, their glowing inscriptions reminding everyone of the shared history between species that once sought unity rather than dominance. Daniel and Solara continued to navigate their roles as peacemakers, often finding themselves caught between the demands of their respective peoples. Yet their connection only deepened, forged not just by mutual admiration but by the sacrifices they had made to preserve life instead of taking it. Their bond challenged societal norms, forcing both humans and Zarnathians to reconsider long-held beliefs about identity, loyalty, and love. One evening, beneath the crimson skies of Eridanus Prime, Solara approached Daniel with a small, ornate box crafted from iridescent materials native to Zarnathia. Inside lay a delicate circlet adorned with phosphorescent stones, a traditional Zarnathian token of commitment. "It is customary among my people," she explained, her voice soft but steady, "to offer such a gift when one wishes to formalize a union." Daniel took the circlet reverently, his fingers tracing its intricate patterns. "And what does this mean for us?" he asked, meeting her multifaceted gaze. "Are we defying our worlds or building a bridge between them?" "Perhaps both," Solara replied with a flicker of her scales, signaling amusement tinged with determination. "But I believe bridges are meant to be crossed, not burned." With that, Daniel slipped the circlet onto his wrist, where it pulsed warmly against his skin, a silent promise to honor their shared vision of a better future. Together, they turned toward the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not as enemies, nor merely as allies, but as partners united by courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of peace.